Hey everybody, this is Wild and Woolly Gaming coming to you live from the middle of nowhere, the center of everywhere today to bring you a full review of the Leopard A1A1 L44 tank that you can purchase online from the Gaijin.net premium store for about $50 USD. This is a big tank and something a lot of people are very interested in buying at any given time, especially when discounts are present. That being said, remember, like, comment, and subscribe, as really subscribing means a ton to me and will help this channel keep going. I'll be going over in this video a ton. So I'll be going over weapons, performance, what makes this tank unique. I'll compare it a little bit to the A1A1 with the 105mm gun. I'll be giving a list of pros and cons, an XM1 comparison, because ultimately this tank will be cross-shopped with the XM1 almost more than any other set of tanks in the entire game for premium. And I'll also be going over a list of 6 different things that I've rated on that I feel like people will find useful, and I will give you my final word. Before I even get into any of that, a lot of people will just probably want to skip to the end to know whether or not they should purchase this tank, and I'll just say this tank, and it makes more sense once you go through the entire review, but ultimately this tank is for more skilled players, much more so than the XM1. The XM1 has a lot of fail-safes in the way of speed and armor, advanced armors that can defeat kinetic and chemical weaponry. This tank does not have that. So it's got a large cannon and sits at a lower BR. It's got tremendous upside at 8.7 and even 9, but beyond that, it just gets walloped. And whereas the XM1 would be able to fare significantly better. So if you feel like you're an excellent player and that you really would benefit from having a larger gun, even in spite of having less armor and less speed, go ahead. This might be the tank for you. But that being said, let's get into the actual review. So what makes this tank unique? It's the L44 cannon. It's the namesake of the tank. It's the Leopard A1A1 L44. Now this cannon is a 120mm cannon that up until the VT1-2 was released was used as early as the Leopard 2K, which itself is a 9.7 BR tank. And this cannon is a doozy. It shoots through 650mm of armor with the Heat FS round, which itself is more than 50% than the standard Leopard A1A1 105mm gun. This same 105mm gun is used as far back as the standard Leopard tank, which really kind of gives you an idea of how old it is. And by the time it gets to 8.7, it's really gotten long in the tooth. It can still defeat many tanks at that BR, but it becomes very difficult. This is where the L44 steps in, and it makes what was once difficult fairly easy. That being said, insofar as stats are concerned, it has a 65 km/h top speed. That is on road, and really only if you're going downhill or you're on a really long stretch of flat road. It's just not powerful or torquey enough to consistently hit anywhere near 65. Rather, you'll probably see yourself maxing out, if you're lucky, around 50 or maybe like 55. For hull armor, you have 70 millimeters of armor front, 35 side, 25 rear. Turret, fairly similar. You have 65 front, 45 side, 52 rear. And really, insofar as the playstyle is concerned, because of its BR and its large gun, you should use this tank as a flanker. Almost kind of like a light tank. However, it's not really so much a light tank because it does have some armor and it's not as fast or agile. And this gun can just wreak havoc across enemy lines. Do not, under any circumstances, unless of course you really cannot avoid it, use this as a frontline tank. It's basically a 7.3 chassis with 8 to 9 BR internals and just mid to high 9 BR gun. The armor protection just will not be there for you to duke it out with anyone, not even people with autocannons and AA fire. The only thing that this can really protect you against consistently are machine guns. That being said, it also has pretty good reverse speed and more or less instant acceleration. And one thing that I did compare this to is the Panther II. I find it fairly interesting. And one thing, because I love the Panther II in this game, I noticed a lot of similarities when I first picked this tank up compared to the Panther II insofar, not as so much play style, but insofar as I guess you could say power distribution and how fast it is combined with rear acceleration. Although the reverse top speed for the Leopard is quite a bit higher than the Panther, it's fairly similar acceleration. That being said, insofar as the pros and cons are concerned, the biggest pro of this tank, as you can imagine, is the massively powerful gun. It can just either knock out or disable many tanks in one shot. Oftentimes, it's even more effective than the XM1 gun, which is a 105 millimeter gun, and it sits at 9.0 BR. It's got decent penetration, or really excellent penetration, I should say, that can take out almost anyone that you face. It gets more difficult to penetrate tanks effectively as you get farther in range and as you get higher in BR. However, this can be counteracted with just being really accurate, because this is also a very accurate gun. It's got decent mobility, although this becomes kind of a liability and a con at higher BRs. It's got an excellent stabilizer that keeps you accurate so long as you're not going over insanely difficult terrain. This is really just largely because the tank itself is not going to be all that fast and just can't disrupt the stabilizer because its speed just is not great enough to do so. It also has an excellent reload rate. Despite the increase in gun size compared to the 105 in the standard Leopard A1A1, the reload rate is actually the same as the 105 on the Leopard A1A1. It sits around 8.7 seconds, depending on your crew capabilities. It has an effective turret reverse rate, and it also has an effective, I guess you could say, turn rate as well. And as mentioned before, it has pretty good reverse speed and instant reverse acceleration. So whereas the frontal speed is just kind of lacking at higher BRs, reverse speed's not that bad. Insofar as cons are concerned, this tank exists at a BR that sees rapidly changing tanks and just that favors speed and acceleration, which this tank, when compared to 9.0 plus BR tanks, does not have. The armor exists, but it's weak and really much like standard Leopard 1 tanks, just will not protect you from much. As mentioned before, it can hardly even protect you against AA or auto cannons. You have limited ammo choices, being that this has the Heat FS and the Sable rounds. It's not really one for a ton of choice. But those tanks, those shells should be able to knock out most tanks pretty consistently. But again, you will not have much choice in what you can do. Now, the Leopard L44 will likely be facing higher than 8.7 tanks. Once you get to 9.0, plus the speed and the armor of those modern tanks just really makes the Leopard A1A1 L44 just seem outdated. And also, one thing that most people do not talk about is the lack of a heavy machine gun that just leaves you kind of vulnerable against air targets, especially against helicopters, which you'll be facing a lot of, and lightly armored vehicles such as APCs. You will not be able to do much damage to them, and oftentimes shooting at them with your two LMGs makes you into a target. So that being said, when comparing this to the XM1, there's a lot to consider, and I think it largely depends on your skill level. So the XM1, as mentioned previously, has far more fail-safes in the way of armor and speed, even though it has to face higher BR matches. That said, it also has near instant acceleration, whereas the Leopard just accelerates slowly, relatively speaking at least. The Leopard is a little bit less expensive typically once discounts come around, but at that point you're kind of trading price for potential upside at higher tiers. And I'll say this, I think at 8.7, the Leopard A1A1 L44 has a significantly higher upside than the XM1 has at 9. So I think the XM or the Leopard can dominate at 8.7 more so than the XM1 can dominate at 9. The big difference here is that the XM1 can dominate for longer through a range of BRs, whereas the XM1 or the Leopard A1A1 L44 kind of gets left in the dust beyond BR9. And it's largely just because the tank chassis, not because of the gun, but the chassis and everything surrounding it just cannot compete. The XM1 is also a little bit more of a difficult tank to learn. You will not just get into it, especially if you've never really gone to the test range before with it. You'll not just get into it and just be successful. It's a pretty tough tank to learn because it's a totally new idea on tanks, especially if you're used to just World War II tanks. That being said, insofar as my scores are concerned, I give this a 9.5 out of 10 for its gun and the destructive capability with it for 8.7 BR. And again, I'm rating these based on the BR. For speed, I give it a 5 for its 8.7 BR. but the speed really falls pretty sharply as you go with each BR tier up. For armor, I give it a 4. That might even be a little bit higher, but for 8.7, I give it a 4. This is, again, essentially a 7.3 tank, or a 7.7 depending on if you play arcade or realistic, and even at that rank, it still has hardly any armor to speak of. This tank has no advanced armor that can defeat anything, any special type of shell like stable or heat rounds. And so far as internals are concerned, like the stabilizer, rangefinder, and even the crew compartment, I give it a 7 out of 10 for 8.7. So again, while it's very good, one of the reasons why the stabilizer is so good and so effective is because the tank can't really go fast enough to challenge it or throw it off. Insofar as fun factor is concerned, I give it a solid 9 out of 10 for its own BR, but that goes down by about 1.5 points for every BR increment that you go up. So at 9, it goes down to 7.5, 9.3 it goes down to 6, and at 9.7 it goes down to about 4.5, and that might even be a little bit high at that point. Insofar as real world cost is concerned, I give it a 7. So this is really if you use your money correctly, right? So it's not like, oh, this is a complete waste of time, or complete waste of money. I give it a 7 in that category. So while I give it bonus points for its potential at its own BR, again, this tank really suffers beyond 9 BR, whereas the XM1 remains relatively competent through a spectrum of BRs. That being said, for its final score, I give it a solid 41.5 out of 60. So I'll rate this tank as having tons of upside, especially if you're really good with tanks to begin with and you get a favorable BR. But if you get stuck in anything above a 9.0, this tank can just really feel like you're trudging through the Siberian tundra. So that being said, the final word is that this is an amazing tank when facing same or lower BR vehicles. Even up to 9, it still feels pretty confident or competent, especially if you can keep yourself away from those tanks. But beyond 9, it just feels like a footnote, whereas the XM1 can consistently challenge throughout. Again, I feel like this has a higher ceiling than the XM1, but the XM1 ultimately is just going to be better through a range. So it's difficult to say whether or not you should purchase this tank, but if a good deal goes around, I definitely give the Leopard A1A1 L44 my thorough recommendation, really for its potential to wreck tanks at 9.0 or below. It's just a glass cannon, tons of fun, and just something that you will not be able to have with the XM1. So it's just, again, tons of fun, and if you're really good at playing this game, especially at tanks, I would consider getting this over the XM1 almost any day, especially if there's a good deal going on. So again, this is Wild and Woolly Gaming. Tell me what you guys think about this video. Did I change your mind as to whether or not you'd buy this tank versus the XM1? Let me know. Comment below. Remember, like and comment and subscribe. And either way, again, Wild and Woolly Gaming signing out for tonight. And hope you guys have a great day, great night, great wherever it is, wherever you are. Again, thanks so much, and see you guys later. Take care.